The desert stretched endlessly beneath a ruthless sun, its breath dry and lifeless. Heat shimmered in waves over cracked earth and scattered rocks, where even time seemed to falter. There was no mercy here, only survival. The winds whispered ancient secrets as they skimmed over sand dunes and brittle shrubs, carrying stories of those who dared to trespass this land of extremes. High on a rocky bluff overlooking the parched valley below, a herd of Mustangs stood still as statues. The lead stallion, a dark dapple gray with a streak of white lightning down his neck, stood at the front, muscles taut, nostrils flared. His name, unknown to humans, was Ashwind, a force of nature carved from stone and fire, bred to roam and fight and protect. His ears flicked forward, catching something unusual on the wind. His eyes, dark and ancient, scanned the emptiness below and then narrowed. Something was wrong. Far below, a lone figure moved sluggishly across the sand, each step a battle. She was barely upright, a limp dragging behind her like a shadow. Her ranger uniform was torn, the green dulled by dust and blood. Her face, sunburnt and slick with sweat, twisted with pain as she stumbled and fell to her knees. For a moment she didn't move. Then slowly, as if defying death itself, she forced herself up again. Elena Cruz had always been stubborn. It was why she'd chosen this life, patrolling the National Reserve alone, keeping watch over its dwindling wildlife, its fragile peace. She had known the dangers. But knowing them didn't make her immune. She'd been trying to track an illegal off-road vehicle reported in the restricted wild horse sanctuary. The tracks led her farther than she realized. Then came the storm, sudden and fierce. Her ATV flipped in the chaos, crashing into a hidden ravine. She had crawled from the wreckage, ribs bruised, ankle twisted, a gash slicing across her forehead. Her radio was lost. Her water was gone. And the desert was already closing in. Now, miles from the nearest outpost, she had nothing left but instinct and will. Ashwin did not understand her pain, but he understood imbalance. The desert had rules, silent but sacred. Everything had its place. The woman was not in hers. The herd behind him shifted restlessly, sensing his unease. A young mare, golden and curious, stepped forward. Her name, unspoken yet felt, was Lyra. Her eyes gleamed with something dangerous for a wild creature. Empathy. Elena collapsed again, her body curling around itself in defeat. She could no longer tell whether the heat or the blood loss was making her dizzy. The sun carved halos into her vision. Her breaths came shallow and raspy. When she opened her eyes next, there was a shadow standing before her. For a moment she thought she was hallucinating. It was a horse. No, several, gathered just beyond a cluster of brittle mesquite. She blinked. One stepped forward, closer than the others. His mane caught the wind like firelight in motion. Elena reached a trembling hand toward him, lips cracking as she whispered, "You're real." But her hand dropped before it reached him, and her eyes fluttered closed. Ashwin didn't flee. Lyra approached cautiously, hooves silent on the sand. The others watched, uncertain. Wild horses did not trust humans. They had reason not to. But something had changed in the air. Perhaps it was the quiet desperation in Elena's body. Perhaps it was the scent of blood and fear. Or perhaps it was the way she had looked at them, not with conquest but with awe. Ashwin let her come forward. He kept watch, his eyes scanning the horizon. Predators moved in these parts. Coyotes. Buzzards. Worse things with metal and noise. Lyra sniffed at the woman, then nudged her side with her muzzle. No reaction. The mare pawed gently at the ground, then touched Elena's shoulder again. A weak groan escaped the ranger's throat, followed by a whisper so soft it barely stirred the air. Water? But there was no water here. Lyra turned back as if confused. Horses did not carry supplies. They did not give aid. But they remembered where water lay. Hidden springs. Shallow creeks tucked beneath stone shelves. Places passed down by instinct and memory. Ashwin made a decision. He snorted sharply, commanding the herd to follow. Most obeyed, though some lingered, nervous. Ashwin stayed, flanking Elena with Lyra. He would not leave her to die. Hours passed. Elena slipped deeper into fevered dreams. She saw her mother's garden in New Mexico, the red hibiscus blooming in rows. She saw her younger self running beside a creek, chasing a stallion in her imagination. She heard her father's voice, warning her that wild things could not be tamed, and that maybe they shouldn't be. When she woke again, the stars had risen. The desert had changed faces. The cold bit into her skin now, cruel and sudden. She shivered violently. Something warm pressed beside her. Lyra had lain down close, her body blocking the wind. Ashwin stood on the other side, unmoving like a sentry. Elena tried to speak but her throat cracked in pain. She blinked, trying to stay conscious. A howl broke the silence, a coyote far off but not far enough. Ashwin's ears twitched. He stepped closer to Elena's form and stamped the ground. It was not a threat, but a warning. They would not give her up so easily. When dawn came, painting the horizon with bruised gold and pink, Elena tried once more to lift her head. Her arm barely moved. She squinted toward the east and saw a glimmer, a faint tower silhouette. A radio repeater. If she could reach it, she might survive. But it was miles away. Ashwin seemed to sense the shift. He took a few paces in that direction, then turned and looked back at her. Lyra remained still, pressing her warmth into Elena's side. The rest of the herd hovered in the distance, unsure. Elena clutched at her belt, her fingers numb. There in a small pouch, her emergency flare. One match. One chance. With trembling hands she pulled it out and struck it. A red flare shot up into the morning sky, trailing smoke and light. The horses spooked. Some scattered briefly. Even Ashwin reared slightly, pawing the air. But then something happened. Instead of running, Ashwin stepped forward. His hooves slammed down again, deliberate, thunderous. He reared once more as if trying to call the sky itself. The smoke rose higher. Lyra neighed softly, circling Elena protectively. The flare began to fade. Elena's vision blurred. Her strength slipped through her fingers like sand. The desert was quiet again. Only the wind remained. But Ashwin did not move. He stood tall, eyes locked on the horizon. Waiting. Watching. For something. Or someone. And in that stillness, beneath the shadow of death and the weight of the wild, a silent pact was made, between the creature born of dust and the woman who had come too close to becoming it. The desert had chosen not to take her. Not yet. Not while wild hearts still beat beside her. A sharp pain woke her. Elena's eyes fluttered open, bloodshot and bleary. The world swam in shades of gold and ash. Her throat felt like it had been scrubbed raw with sand. Her limbs were heavy, weighted by dehydration and the chill of night lingering in her bones. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then she saw her. The mare. Golden in the morning light, her coat catching the first sunbeams like fire through wheat. Lyra stood close, closer than any wild horse should have been. Her dark eyes met Elena's, unreadable but calm. Her breath misted in the air. Elena tried to sit up and failed. Her body rebelled. A cough racked through her ribs. She barely had the strength to bring her hand up to her chest. Water? Her voice broke on the word, a rasp more than a plea. Lyra didn't move, but Elena thought she saw her ears flick as if she understood. It was madness to believe that. She knew it. And yet. Ashwin stood at a distance, his silhouette cut against the rising sun. He was alert, watchful, the wind tugging his mane like war banners. He seemed made from the land itself, solid, deliberate, and impossibly ancient. Elena looked past them both, toward the barely visible glint of metal in the far horizon. The repeater tower. Maybe 10 miles away. Maybe more. She couldn't make it. But she wasn't dead yet. Slowly, trembling, she reached for her side. Her fingers fumbled across the torn seam of her vest. The emergency pack she always kept, half a protein bar and a flint. No water. She cursed under her breath, then sighed, the sound more grief than frustration. Lyra took a step forward. Startled, Elena stopped moving. The mare's hooves were nearly silent on the sand. She lowered her head cautiously and nudged Elena's arm. The touch was light, unsure. Elena stared. You're not afraid of me, she whispered, barely audible. But maybe Lyra should have been. Humans had brought nothing but fences, helicopters, roundups. And still here she was, choosing to stay. Elena struggled onto her side, then to her knees. Pain sliced through her body like hot knives. She let out a breathless sob, more from the effort than the emotion. She had to move. Just a little. She reached a shaking hand toward Lyra's mane. The horse flinched at first, then allowed it, just for a second. The strands were coarse, tangled with dust. Elena gripped them gently, not to ride or control, but to steady herself. She leaned against the mare's body, her cheek pressing to warm fur. Lyra held. With her help, Elena managed to crawl forward a few feet. Each inch cost her something. A memory, a piece of hope, another sliver of strength. But the mare waited, walking when Elena moved, stopping when she collapsed again. She didn't rush or spook. It was as if she had accepted this impossible task, guiding a broken woman across the desert. Somewhere behind them, the rest of the herd followed at a cautious distance. Ashwin kept his distance, circling at times, pausing on ridges to survey the land. He was not docile, not tamed. But he did not leave. The sun climbed higher. The heat returned. Elena's skin burned through the remnants of her sleeves. Her lips cracked deeper, the taste of blood on her tongue. At one point she lost consciousness. She dreamed of oceans, of swimming through cool waves, laughter echoing off cliffs, a childhood trip long buried in her mind. When she woke again, Lyra was gone. Panic shot through her, wild and cold. She tried to lift her head but could only roll onto her back. The sky swam. The air pulsed with heat. Tears stung her eyes, not from pain but abandonment. Then a sound, hoofbeats. Lyra returned at a trot, her muzzle wet, water dripping from her chin. And Elena understood. Somehow, someway the mare had found it. The spring was nearby. Lyra neighed, louder now, circling Elena before trotting away a short distance, then back again. Elena blinked, her brain fogged but grasping the message. She had to follow. Again, with impossible effort, she crawled. She dragged herself over sharp stone and thorny scrub. Her fingers bled. Her knees burned. But she moved. 30 feet. 60. And then she heard it. A soft trickle. Around a cluster of jagged rocks, partially hidden beneath hanging ferns and a downed log, water flowed, a thin but steady ribbon winding into a shallow basin. It wasn't much, but it was salvation. Elena plunged her hands in, bringing handfuls to her lips, not caring about grit or purity. She drank like it was her first breath. The pain receded, not gone but dulled. Her mind cleared just enough to think again. She collapsed beside the pool, clutching the earth like it could carry her weight. Lyra stood nearby, her tail swishing, ears twitching at invisible flies. "You saved me," Elena murmured, her voice hoarse. "You really did." Behind them, the sun began to dip again, throwing long shadows across the rocks. Elena knew she couldn't stay there forever. The water would help, yes, but the tower, the signal, was still distant. And her body could only go so far. She needed a miracle. Or perhaps something better. That night the wind came hard. A storm brewed on the edge of the horizon, not the sharp, violent kind that brings floods, but the cold breath of night mixed with dust and fury. The stars vanished beneath a clouded veil. Ashwind returned just before darkness swallowed the land. His flanks were coated in grit, his eyes wary. Coyotes howled again, this time closer. Elena curled against a rock, trembling. The stallion approached her. Slow. Measured. Sovereign. He stood only feet away now, his chest rising and falling like a war drum. For a long time he did nothing. Then, without a sound, he turned and stood beside her, his massive frame blocking the wind. A sentinel. Lyra joined him moments later, lowering herself beside Elena again. Her breath warmed the ranger's back. Elena closed her eyes, her heart aching with something deeper than pain. Gratitude. Humility. She had spent years protecting wild things. Fighting for them in courtrooms, chasing poachers, facing down bureaucracy. And now, in her hour of need, those wild things had returned the favor. Not because they were trained or ordered, but because they chose to. It didn't make sense. And yet it did. The night passed in pieces. She woke once to find Ashwind snorting at something in the distance. Glowing eyes blinked from behind a bush, predators testing their odds. They never came closer. The stallion's presence was enough. By dawn, her fever had broken. She wasn't healed, not even close. But she was alive. And for the first time since the crash, she believed she might stay that way. Her hands trembled as she reached for the flare. The last one. She struck it. A column of crimson smoke spiraled into the sky. The horses startled again, but this time they didn't run. Lyra neighed, backing away only a few paces. Ashwind reared, hooves cracking the earth. He turned his head to the sky as if willing it to answer. The smoke rose. And then it faded. Elena lowered her head. "Please," she whispered, not sure who she was talking to anymore. "Let someone see it." The desert was silent. The herd stood around her in a wide arc, wild sentinels keeping guard over something fragile, something foreign. And then Ashwind turned. He faced the horizon again, ears pinned forward. And he began to move. Not away, but toward something. Elena watched him, too weak to ask questions. All she could do now was hope he knew where to go. That there was someone left to follow. Because if not, this would be the end of the story. And yet, in her chest, something whispered it wasn't. A low rumble stirred the air, not thunder but the growl of an engine. Distant. Faint. Elena wasn't sure at first if it was real. She lay still beside the shallow spring, her body a patchwork of bruises and dried blood, her limbs stiff from the cold. Her breath caught as the sound grew louder, climbing the slope of the wind like a ghost finding form. She forced her eyes open. Ashwind had vanished. The golden mare still lingered nearby, her head low as if sensing the shift in energy. Her ears flicked back and forth, attentive. Elena blinked toward the horizon, heart fluttering with the painful hope that someone, anyone, had seen the flare. And then she saw him. Ashwind, galloping across the ridge, his muscles rippling with strength that defied exhaustion. Dust curled around his legs in ribbons as he sprinted down into the valley, hooves striking the earth like war drums. Behind him the engine's growl sharpened. A speck appeared on the horizon, small, metallic, moving. A truck. Ashwin didn't stop. He ran toward it, cutting across the open flat of the desert, as if trying to intercept it. His mane flew behind him, silvered by the rising sun. To the driver it must have looked like a vision, an impossible sight in the middle of nowhere. Elena pushed herself upright. Pain screamed through her spine, but she ignored it. She watched, breathless, as the truck slowed. She couldn't make out details, but she saw the red insignia on the door. Rangers. One of her own. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Relief came so sudden, so raw, she let out a broken laugh. Ashwin stopped just short of the vehicle, skidding to a halt and pawing the ground. The driver, helmeted and cautious, opened the door, stepping out slowly. The Mustang reared once, then turned and ran, disappearing into the maze of canyons. Leading him. The ranger followed. Minutes passed in fragments. Elena's vision blurred again, but she clung to consciousness, refusing to let it go. She heard boots crunching gravel. Voices. A radio. Then, hands. Gentle but firm. The sting of antiseptic. The metallic snap of a water bottle being opened. Her name was spoken. Over and over. As if reminding her she still existed. Elena. Ranger Cruz. We've got you. You're safe now. She was lifted onto a stretcher. 4 fluids were inserted. Her wounds cleaned. The world tilted around her, but her eyes clung to the sky. Did you see them? She whispered. The young paramedic beside her frowned. The Mustangs? She nodded slowly. They saved me. He smiled, unsure whether to believe it, but he didn't argue. Behind them, Lyra stood on a ledge, unmoving. Watching. And then, like a wisp of wind, she turned and vanished into the rising heat. The days that followed passed in a hospital far from the desert's harsh embrace. Elena drifted in and out of sleep, her body stitched and reset, her mind circling the memory like a hawk over prey. Nurses came and went. Doctors murmured praises about her resilience. But no one could explain how she'd survived that long. Or how she'd made it to water. Or how a rescue truck had appeared at precisely the right moment. She didn't tell them the whole truth. Not yet. It wasn't something people easily understood. That animals, not pets, not trained creatures, but truly wild souls had carried her, guarded her, led help to her like silent angels of the dust. She kept that part close. One night, when the halls were quiet and the world had dimmed to the hush of beeping monitors, she stared out her window at the stars and whispered, "I'll come back for you." 2 weeks later she returned. Not in uniform. Not with sedatives or helicopters. Just as herself, a woman with a limp in her step, a fire in her chest, and gratitude blooming like wildflowers in her blood. She walked into the edge of the reserve, where the stone canyons met the scrub plains, where the air smelled of dry cedar and freedom. She stood alone with the wind, her eyes sweeping the ridges. They didn't come right away. She hadn't expected them to. She brought no food, no reward. Only presence. And presence in the wild meant everything. Then, movement. Far on a ridge, silhouettes gathered like ghosts pulled from memory. Ashwin was there. She knew it without seeing the lightning strike mark on his neck. His form was unmistakable, imposing, proud, wary. And beside him, Lyra. The golden light of dusk painted her coat with fire. Her gaze met Elena's across the distance, calm and knowing. The mare didn't move. But she didn't leave either. Elena placed her hand to her heart. A silent thank you passed through breath alone. She didn't need them to come closer. She just needed them to know she had kept her promise. Time passed. And with it the story began to spread. Rangers told it in fragments, of a woman who should have died, who was found in a place no rescue team had expected to search, led there by a horse with a storm in his eyes. Some dismissed it. Others believed too easily. But the ones who knew Elena, the ones who saw the way her voice trembled when she spoke of those days, or how she paused at the edge of wild places like she was listening for someone, they understood. Something had happened out there, deeper than survival. Deeper than instinct. A bond had formed. Unspoken. Unbreakable. Elena resumed her work, but everything felt changed. The fences looked taller. The policies more urgent. She fought harder to preserve untouched land, to stop the roundups, to defend the lives no one else bothered to see. Because she had seen. She had been seen. Months later, on another patrol, a young ranger called her over. "You won't believe what we spotted. It's the same herd. The one that found you." She rushed to the ridge. Pulled up binoculars. There they were. Ashwind, head high, mane flying like battle flags. Lyra grazing at his side. A smaller form beside her. A foal. Golden like its mother. With a streak of silver down its nose. Elena gasped softly. Her heart caught. The wild had given her something more than life. It had given her proof. That even in the hardest, harshest corners of the earth, compassion lived. That trust could bloom in silence. That freedom and kindness weren't opposites, but allies. She watched them until they disappeared into the wind. The sun dipped low again. And Elena Cruz, once lost and nearly broken, stood at the edge of the world with tears in her eyes, not from pain or fear, but awe. Because somewhere out in that sea of dust and silence, a herd of Mustangs had made a choice. And in doing so they had changed everything. The wind carried no sound but its own cry, lonely, ancient, and defiant. Elena stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking the valley where it had all begun. Her boots pressed into the red dust, and her hand rested on the old ranger's hat she now wore not out of obligation but honor. Below, the land stretched in silent grandeur, withered pines, jagged rock, the same broken canyons that had once threatened to become her grave. And somewhere in that vastness they ran still. Months had passed, yet her pulse still quickened when she remembered Lyra's breath warming her side in the cold, Ashwind's silhouette cresting the horizon like a spirit of legend. Their presence haunted her, not in fear but in reverence. The kind that shifts how a person walks through the world. Elena had made a decision. Today was not about survival. It was about truth. The world needed to know what she had seen. But not in documentaries or newspaper blurbs. They needed to feel it, to understand the weight of a gaze shared across species, the unspeakable grace of mercy when you've nothing left to give. And so she had invited them. Conservationists, journalists, skeptics. They'd flown in from cities, wide-eyed and skeptical, armed with cameras and questions. They hadn't believed her. Not fully. Not yet. But they were about to. They should be here soon, Elena said, her voice calm despite the anticipation thrumming through her veins. The gathered group stood behind her, watching the valley with a mixture of curiosity and disinterest. It was hard to make believers out of people who'd only known wild through textbooks. "Wild horses don't come when called," one of them said with a skeptical smirk. "Even the tamed ones barely do." She didn't argue. She just waited. The sun crested higher. Heat shimmered across the earth like waves on an unseen sea. A hawk called out, circling overhead. Dust twisted up from distant ridges. And then, a flicker of movement. Elena's breath hitched. They came like ghosts, emerging from stone and wind. First Lyra, golden and glowing in the sunlight. Her head held high, her movements fluid, almost regal. Then Ashwind, ever watchful, flanking her with unshakable presence. Behind them the herd followed, wild and wary but not fleeing. Not this time. The group behind Elena fell silent. Cameras lowered. Mouths parted in awe. "They're not running," someone whispered. "They're coming toward us." Elena didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on Lyra, who paused a few yards away, then stepped forward, hooves quiet on the packed earth. The foal trotted beside her, all legs and wonder. It stopped to sniff a sage bush, then looked up, directly at Elena. She lowered to one knee. No reaching. No calling. Only stillness. Lyra moved closer. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but she didn't blink. This wasn't a moment for spectacle. It was a sacred offering. Lyra stopped just within reach. The foal pressed against her side, curious but cautious. Elena held her breath, heart open. And then, impossibly, the mare lowered her head. Their foreheads touched, if only for a heartbeat. The spell broke only when Ashwin snorted, circling wide, protective. The others backed away instinctively. He didn't threaten, just reminded. They belonged to no one. Elena rose slowly. "She remembered you," someone said behind her. "No," Elena replied softly. "She chose to trust me again. There's a difference." Later, as the visitors departed with minds shaken and eyes wide, Elena remained. She watched the herd fade back into the hills, dust rising behind them like firelight. Her heart was heavy, but not with sorrow. with purpose. She had work to do. The footage would help, yes. But the real battle wasn't about visibility, it was about value. Convincing the world that these creatures were not relics or nuisances, but sacred parts of the land's soul. That protecting them was not a charity, but a duty. And it would be a battle. Already rumors circled of another roundup, new contracts, new roads. The old lies whispered in polished conference rooms far from the smell of sun-baked earth. They called the horses feral, said they were overpopulating, damaging the terrain. Elena knew better. She had seen better. That night, back at the station, she drafted her statement for the hearing. Words poured like water from a broken dam. Not statistics. Not just science. But story. A story of survival, compassion, and the undeniable intelligence behind wild eyes. She spoke of the touch of a muzzle when hope had died, of a stallion standing sentinel in the dark. When she finished, she looked out the window. The stars were bright tonight. She stepped outside, letting the cool desert air wrap around her. Silence stretched, deep and ancient. A coyote yipped in the distance. Somewhere far off, hooves thundered against rock. And she smiled. Because she knew they were still out there, unbound, unbroken. As they were meant to be. Not all stories end with capture or conquest. Some end with a beginning. A promise. And the wild, galloping free under a sky that finally remembered how to listen.